Presently, many black people now reveres, respect, and admires Caucasians, in spite of the fact that Caucasians have never earned our reverence, respect, nor admiration. Presently, many black people also now blindly believes whatever the white society tells us, especially whatever negative things they say about us. Many does so, although the white society has never actually earned our blind trust, nor have they ever earned the credibility to control what black people believes about ourselves. Because the white society has in fact been telling lies to us and about us for more than 400 years. Presently, many black people also now perceives ourselves as being our worst enemies, in spite of more than 400 years of evidentiary history, proving that white oppressive forces are in fact our worst enemies. When observing all of these noted facts, it becomes clear to see that many black people are not currently functioning based upon an accurate interpretation of the true history shared between our racial group and Caucasians. Here's why. Brutalizers never teach true history to those they brutalize throughout history because they know that doing so will largely cause resentment against them amongst those groups that they brutalized throughout history. They therefore always teaches a false version of history that makes the brutal oppressors appear as having been lesser brutally immoral than they truly in fact were. This is the hidden reality regarding the history taught to black people by the white society. It has been whitewashed to make Caucasian appear lesser immoral towards black people than they truly in fact were. This whitewashing is especially deemed as necessary given the extent of how brutally immoral the white society's mistreatment of black people truly in fact were throughout history. Our minds are also being continually manipulated to think in ways beneficial to the white society through constant media manipulation. It's how the white society protects itself from massive unified black retribution. And what is under siege is our ability and willingness to think critically, to challenge what we are told, and to resist their efforts to manipulate and deceive us. Because of this ongoing manipulation of our collective minds, most black people don't have a mental reference of our true reality. Therefore, I will present a scenario that illustrates our true reality and what has been done to us and why it has been done. Imagine that a group of evil barbarians invaded a home to kill, pillage, and rob it of all of its wealth. Then while leaving the home in ruins, these invaders kidnapped some of the children from their homes and enslaved them. These invaders, fearing an eventual retribution from the enslaved children, will logically find it necessary to implement systems to ensure that they remain loyal to them and never hold them accountable for their evil actions. Because while these barbarians, through their weaponry advantages of guns, rifles, and cannons, can invade the children's home and enslave them, they, however, cannot win their loyalty or sustain peace with them for long unless systems are put in place to keep the enslaved children loyal and to prevent dissent from rising among them. To meet these objectives, these barbarians would have to indoctrinate disinformation into their minds that makes the enslaved children think in ways that ensures that they never seek retribution against the invaders. This would require whitewashing the details of the invasion and enslaving of children. The barbarians would miseducate the enslaved children to believe that they merely rescued them from a dilapidated home where they were unwanted by their parents. They may also tell them that their parents merely sold them away. These barbarians may also find it necessary to make the enslaved children embarrassed of their earlier home. To achieve this objective, the invaders would routinely show the enslaved children only the worst depictions of their original home. The objective here is to make the enslaved children ashamed of their former home. The premise behind doing so is that the more ashamed of their original home the children are made, the more appreciative they'll become for having been enslaved. These combined undertaking would cause the children to perceive the invading barbarians as being their rescuers rather than the brutal robbing invaders and enslavers they truly in fact were. This would cause the enslaved children to develop an undeserving sense of loyalty and appreciation toward these barbarian invaders. It would also prevent the children from demanding the reparation they're entitled to because they now feel indebted to the invaders. This is precisely what the white society has done to black people. This is why white propaganda constantly inundates African Americans through the white controlled media to seeing only the poorest parts of Africa. They rarely, if ever, show us the beautiful and wealthy cities in Africa. These deplorable depictions of Africa's displaying only its poorest communities are in fact designed to embarrass and humiliate African Americans. Moreover, it makes many of us feel grateful that it was our ancestors that were enslaved and brought to America. This propaganda campaign has worked so well that many African Americans openly says that they're happy that slavery happened. Also, like within that example I've just given, the white society also manipulates us to believe that most of our enslaved ancestors were sold away by other Africans. However, let's look at the facts as they truly were while critically thinking. If Africans originally owned all of the gold, diamonds, and natural resources, and the Western world's money had no value whatsoever in Africa, how then is it possible that the majority of the millions of enslaved Africans were fairly purchased and therefore sold away? And given all that we now know about Caucasians, to believe that they went into Africa with the weaponry advantages of guns, rifles, and cannons, but rather than maximizing their profit by kidnapping most of their enslaved Africans, they instead found ways to fairly purchase them, it's absolutely ridiculous. Because such a claim totally contradicts over 400 years of demonstrated evidence and behavior by Caucasians in regard to the treatment of Africans when it comes to making profit. When you critically think and look at the facts as they truly were, it becomes clear that most of our enslaved ancestors were not sold off. Most Africans that participated in the African slave trade actually did so under duress. After realizing that they could not overcome the white invaders' weaponry advantages of guns, rifles, and cannons, some tribes agreed to assist in capturing of other tribes in exchange for leaving their tribes alone. The entire history we've been taught by the white historians about Africa has been distorted to make us think in ways benefiting the white society. To make us feel grateful that they invaded Africa, they also miseducate us to believe that before they invaded Africa and enslaved Africans, that our ancestors were uncivilized and illiterate. This is, however, also totally untrue. Long before the Europeans invaded Africa, it was Africans that civilized Europe. All of Greece's first scholars openly admitted that their knowledge came from Africa. The world's first scholars were in fact Africans. African scholars introduced science, writing, math, and philosophy to the world. The world's oldest university, library, manuscript, encyclopedia, human prosthetic, mathematical tools, medical journals, and world's oldest standing kingdom are all located in Africa. Africans invented the wheel, paper, the calendar, the concept of 24 hours in a day. Africans were the first to build in stone and the first to smelt metal. White historians conceal these facts from black people because they can't teach our true great historical history and still continue their oppression of black people. Because once the people have been made to know their greatness, they no longer accept their oppression. This is a historical fact. White historians also cannot teach the true greatness of Africa to black people because to do so would then they'd have to admit that they interrupted that great history. They also can't teach our true history because it would totally debunk the myth of their white racial superiority over Africans. The white society therefore instead socialized Africans. Socialized is when the oppressors exploit their monopoly over information that are systematically and repetitively fed into the collective minds of the oppressed to manipulate the oppressed to think and behave in ways that are beneficial to the oppressors. Throughout history, those empires that were brutally oppressive, fearing an eventual retribution from those they have oppressed, have always socialized the minds of the oppressed to think in ways that prevent such acts of massive retribution. Therefore, the beliefs and perceptions held by the oppressed are never truly their own. They're always falsehoods that are beneficial to the oppressors, that were shrewdly embedded into the collective minds of the oppressed by their oppressors without the oppressed even realizing it. This is what white oppressive forces have done to black people. Our minds have been and are continually being manipulated to think in ways benefiting the white society. The white media's unrelenting negative depictions of black people that amplifies the negative to the point that it distorts our reality is much more than just biased media reporting. It's actually an insidious black racially demoralizing divide and conquer psychological warfare campaign. Demoralizing divide and conquer is the method of maintaining control over a targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-hate and division between them. This system against black people is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects black people to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent black racially demoralizing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of the black population without being challenged or counterbalanced by an equal amount of black positive racially affirming information. It conveys a subliminal message that black people are now our own worst enemies and that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This system is extremely effective because when black people are repetitively presented these noted narratives from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied propaganda programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. With time, being unable to refute the constant negative disinformation about ourselves, many black people eventually comes to accept them as being true. This acceptance shifts black collective aggressions away from the white oppressive society and redirects it against ourselves. It also creates black self-hatred and disunity, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people. Remove a people's self-love and unity, and they can be ruled over indefinitely, perhaps even forever. This psychological warfare system provides white oppressive forces with a more proficient method for controlling and subjugating black people. For unlike the past blatant racist segregation systems that black people were easily able to identify and therefore unify ourselves against and develop counter strategies against, this system is not easily recognized nor is it easily comprehended by most of its black victims. However, it works so well that it not only makes black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it in many cases causes black people to even prefer it. It is at the root of the profound division and self-hatred now plaguing so many within the black community. Sadly, to our detriment, the oppressed will always believe the fraudulent worst about themselves. That's a quote from Frantz Fanon. Black people, it's time to elevate our minds. It's time to learn the truth. It is time to function based upon what is truth. Our plight and condition has nothing to do with a biblical fairy tale written by our most ungodly enemies, nor is it has anything to do with a Willie Lynch myth, which present what would be the least effective method used to control generations of people. We must function based on what is truth in order to liberate ourselves. One love and peace.